Hello friends, and welcome back to my YouTube channel where today I'm going to be going through the process for how I make one of my Terrarium dice sets. The filming of this was a very bumpy ride, but let's get into it and I'll explain those parts when we get there. To begin, I have to make the resin succulents that are going to be the main feature of the terrarium. You can also do this with real flowers, dried plants, really anything that you can think of. I wanted to do a multicolored succulent for this pour, so I divided my resin into two. A smaller amount I colored this light orange, and a larger amount I colored a dark green. I used Piñata Blanco Blanco as the base for both, and again I want this green to be dark, so I'm actually adding a drop of black into it as well. Then going ahead and mixing these colors as thoroughly as I can. These succulent molds are from Broken River Workshop. I will link their Etsy down below. They are fabulous. I actually beta tested these molds like a year ago and have since bought many more. And you can do whatever colors your heart desires with this. If you want to do something pink, do pink. I was going for a mixed color like that handful of succulents I was holding right there. And I wanted my orange to be a little bit darker or more orange, and my green to be a little bit brighter or more green. So I added some other inks and then mixed those in, and somehow lost the footage of me actually pipetting in the resin to these molds. So I'm going to do a lovely little creative reenactment so you can see what that's like. Luckily, it is a very simple process, but here are my molds. We're going to pretend that this water is resin. Very easy. I do not cut the end of my pipettes. Stick it all the way down until I can feel the bottom. Squeeze until I start to see resin accumulating at the top, and then slowly pull up while I am still squeezing to fill the reservoir. For multicolored succulents, I just go in with my first color, completely guess with how much I have to squeeze in, and then go in with my second after that. Unfortunately, there are no actual measurements I can offer you. Once my succulent molds are out of the pressure pot, it is then time to demold them. It was a nightmare filming this, I'm telling you, injured my finger during the process of this filming, unrelated to it, so it took me a little longer than usual to demold these fellows, but you just want to pull them out as carefully as you can without ripping up any of the mold. It's quite easy, a little bit harder on the first pull of fresh molds, but gets easier the more worn the molds are. Then the only succulent prep that's left is to snip off those little sprues. My phone also ate the footage of this, so I just used a flush cutter, snipped them off. You can see those little marks on the bottom, and I'm going to try to cover those marks with how I do my pour. So the first step of the pour here is to place these little succulents into my blank molds. I place mine face down so those little rough parts are toward me because, again, I want to cover those up. And you can cover them in all sorts of ways. For this set, I decided to use some tinsel or fiber. That is this light blue iridescent. It's my favorite color of this stuff. And I just kind of loop it around my finger to get it concentrated together, if you will, and then work on shoving that into my blank molds to, again, cover up those rough back bits of the resin succulents. And I just do that with all of the dice, looping the tinsel around my finger, figuring out what mold I think it would look best in, and then poking it on there, trying to get all of the fibers into the mold so they're not sticking out and causing a problem. So I finished getting all of these little fiber bits into all of my different dice molds, and then it was time to pour. So using some clear pre-mixed resin, this pour takes a very long time because there is a lot of degassing to do. So here I am just following the process of pouring a little bit of clear resin in, getting very annoyed as it drips down the side of the cup instead of pouring properly, but hey, it works. And then I give that some time to sink down, let the bubbles come up, add a little bit more on top, use my heat gun to degas all of the bubbles that I can, rinse and repeat. I just followed the process of adding a little bit more clear resin until it was, or appeared to be, filled to the top, letting that sink down, the bubbles come up, degassing them with my heat gun, pouring a little bit more on top. But after doing this for a little while, I decided I wanted to play around a little bit and added a couple of drops of Piñata Blanco Blanco, again my default white ink, to the tops of these molds. I was curious whether the ink would manage to drip through the tinsel or not. I've done ink in a terrarium set before, but never with the addition of the tinsel. So this was definitely a fun little experiment, although very time-consuming. And after a while, I just kind of poked the ink around with this Swizzler and tried to get it situated over the openings of the molds since it had shifted a little bit as it was sitting. And I let them just sit there and continue to degas until it appeared that no more bubbles were rising, at which point I poured some clear resin on the cap of my mold and then positioned it, squidged it down, and into the pressure pot for 24 hours these will go. After these were out of the pressure pot, it was then time to do the framing on them. I've already done an entire video on how I do my frames, so I'll keep it short and simple here. I use a very liquidy paint, and then I pick up just a little bit on the tip of a toothpick. I try to deposit that paint onto a corner, and then I use a more clean, not totally clean, but more clean part of the toothpick to then drag that paint across the line of the die. Really, the most important thing here is that you want to use as little paint as possible, if you're trying to do a thin line at least. The more paint you use, the thicker the line is going to be, the more that it is going to obscure the face of the die. And then I just do this a few sides at a time so that I always have somewhere clean to hold on to, and I don't have to worry about accidentally touching wet paint, which is messy and frustrating. Then, once all of the framing is done, the blanks will go in your dice molds. This is more footage that my phone decided to eat, so here is your second creative reenactment. My molds are pink now. You just need to fill them about a quarter to a third. I would go for a third of the way with resin. I am using water just as an example here, but you fill them a third of the way, pop your blanks in. Here's a blank, just like the terrarium blank would be, but with frames. Pop it in there, situate it into place. They should settle automatically via the numbers, helping to align them properly. Top them up with resin, lids go on, into the pressure pot. 24 hours later, and it's time for the demold. This is the fun part. We finally get to pop our dice out of their molds and see what they look like now that they are actual dice. And I was really delighted with how this set turned out. It was both my first time trying these multicolored succulents and also my first time pairing the white ink with tinsel, so a fun experiment, and I think they yielded some very beautiful results. The white ink clearly has a bit of trouble dripping through the tinsel, which I anticipated that it would, but it actually manages it a lot better than I imagined, and I think it leads to a really beautiful effect by both giving a little bit of opaque contrast, which I think is really helpful with sets like these, while also not being too overbearing. Really, I love these. I think they're gorgeous. And with that is all that I have for you in this video. It was a bumpy road full of technical issues, but hey, we managed it in the end. If you liked this video, consider leaving a like, and if you want to see more videos, hey, maybe subscribe. Also, leave a comment down below if you have any questions or ideas for other videos, and as always, I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye!